Good evening, everybody. President Trump today in the White House Rose Garden, where he declared a national emergency over the Wuhan virus pandemic. The president's announcement sparked a blockbuster rally on Wall Street, all three major indexes reaching their highest point gains in history, bouncing back up almost 10% on the day. At the beginning of the president's address at the news conference, the Dow had been up about 900 points. During his news conference, the Dow began climbing and climbing steadily. By the time the president was finished, the Dow had gained more than 1,000 points, closing ahead 1,985 points. The S&P 500 finishing the day higher, markedly higher, 230 points. The Nasdaq soaring 673. President Trump's decision today to declare a national emergency, a strong, swift action that opens up another $50 billion of federal resources to help state and local governments fight the pandemic. The president also waiving interest on federal student loans until further notice, directing the Department of Energy to buy up crude oil to store in the petroleum reserves.
To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. As a result of that action today, we're announcing a new partnership with private sector to vastly increase and accelerate our capacity to test for the coronavirus. We want to make sure that those who need a test can get a test very safely, quickly, and conveniently. The next 8 weeks are critical. We can learn, and we will, turn a corner on this virus.
And over those critical next 2 months, the Trump administration says they will be putting a major emphasis on expanding testing throughout the country. This morning, the FDA approved a new coronavirus test. It is manufactured by the Swiss company Roche. It will speed up the ability to test patients. Partnerships also forged with private industry, providing drive-through testing in some cases in retail parking lots at Walmarts, Targets, Walgreens, CVS stores all across the country. As of tonight, the coronavirus has killed 47 Americans, 22 of those deaths associated with that nursing home just outside Seattle, Washington. There are also more than 1,600 Americans who've been infected with the virus. Both the House and the Senate remaining in session tonight. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin have been negotiating throughout the day. The Speaker saying that she has reached agreement with the Trump administration on a coronavirus response bill, which would provide free testing for all Americans, expanding paid emergency family medical leave, as well as food programs, including SNAP and WIC. And Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, however, says that is not quite the case yet. He's been in constant contact, as I said, with the Speaker throughout the day. He will be joining us here. He is at this moment in the White House speaking with the president. A deal, in his opinion, has not been reached, despite what the Speaker has said. We will have the very latest from the Treasury Secretary here tonight. He will join us as soon as he concludes the talks with the president and gets whatever direction he will from the president. And this breaking news tonight, the Food and Drug Administration approving the use of a test that will expedite the test results for the Wuhan virus. The test, produced by the Swiss company Roche, it's capable of testing more than 4,000 samples each day. It can be run on the Roche machines that have been installed in more than 100 laboratories throughout the country. President Trump today highlighted the speed with which Roche's application was approved.
Using federal emergency authorities, the FDA approved a new test for the virus. We did this within hours after receiving the application from Roche, a process that would normally take weeks. We therefore expect up to 500,000 additional tests will be available early next week. We'll be announcing locations probably on Sunday night.
And joining us tonight to take up this latest action by the Trump administration, Dr. Ian Lipkin. He's the director of the Center for Infection and Immunity at Columbia University, invited, by the way, by the Chinese government to study the coronavirus and to help them tackle the outbreak in their country. It is great to have you back with us.
Great to be with you, Lou.
Doctor, this is, I have never seen a president in my career talk about a partnership with private companies and the medical community and government, and then demonstrated it as he did today. A remarkable moment.
This is an extraordinary moment, I agree. It's pivotal, it's a turning point. The fact that we will be able to recognize who's infected, this will enable isolation, and we hope will help contain this outbreak.
And this, to see the number of people in the public health agencies standing beside the president throughout, to hear governors now starting to talk about how well the federal government is responding. We're starting to see this country get in line with leadership and to deal with what is now, we realize, a very serious challenge to the country, a great threat.
Yes, there have been people who've been making projections that are extraordinary in terms of the number of potential deaths. But as I say, I think this will be a turning point, and I'm optimistic that this is going to have a big impact.
Now, you have been focusing on plasma, and by the way, to be clear, in communication with your colleagues and counterparts in China, who have been discussing this with you, to use the plasma from the blood of patients who survive the coronavirus. And you believe this could have a significant impact on saving lives.
Yes, based on the work that's come out of China, and one of the reasons why I spend time there, in addition to trying to reduce morbidity and mortality there, is because they have a leg up. They see the cases first. They try things that we recommend and that they come up with on their own. So in essence, they're giving us the benefit of their experience in sharing that with us. So there are a group of us who are now pushing this very, very hard.
And that is a very good sign for everyone in this country. What has been the response beyond the medical community? Have you moved beyond to government authorities, to the agencies?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do now is identify people who've been recently infected. So there are 3 large areas. There's one in the Bay Area, there's one up in Seattle, there's another up here just north of us in New Rochelle.
Right.
And I was reaching out to people there today who are in that community, and their kids who've been infected, who've recovered, and they're very enthusiastic about participating.
Well, that's wonderful, because they would have to be, obviously, they're critical to a successful program.
This is citizenship from the top to the bottom, and that's what it's going to take, and we will win.
And, you know, the president today said exactly the same thing. He said that we will prevail, and he acknowledges the challenge, and he has throughout. It is nice to see Democrats beginning to line up. Yes, there are a couple of people running for president who thought they could make political hay out of, out of their speeches, and maybe 1 or 2 in Congress, maybe a few more than that. But to see Democrats actually begin to turn, this is a truly positive sign, because one of the things that I see in China is the ability of the leadership, obviously, in a communist authoritarian government, to bring people together and direct them. This president has to lead, to persuade, and it's paying off now as we see leadership in the Democratic Party starting to understand this is a time for this nation to come together instead of play partisan games.
Well, in China, what people will tell you is it's their duty.
Right, right.
And that's now what we're beginning to see here, too.
And it is indeed, and I like your point of view. Citizenship and contributing to the country, but is precisely that. It's also, we should share with you the good news tonight that we're starting to see real evidence of a turn in China. That is, Starbucks opening up stores, the number of Apple stores. I'm told all of the Apple stores have been opened up. I mean, that's a huge development.
It was very aggressive containment. I'm not sure that we have the belly for that sort of level of containment here, but we're going to have to develop it. We're going to have to make tough decisions. So we're shutting down colleges, universities, struggling at present with what we're going to do with primary schools here. One of the challenges, of course, is that some kids get all their nutrition from these school lunches. So we're going to have to become creative about how we address this challenge, but we will prevail.
Now, Americans are, as I say on this broadcast, we're not buttercups and we're not daffodils. The fact of the matter is we have a heritage and a tradition of meeting challenges, defeating threats, and working together. Sometimes we do it reluctantly. We have to be dragged kicking and screaming toward a goal or an objective, but ultimately we get it done. And I think this case is you and the President have said here today, we will replicate that historic success. As we wrap up here, your thoughts about the dependency that we still share with a lot of other countries on pharmaceuticals and antibiotics originating in China, and a veiled threat from some of the Chinese media over the last week that they might exercise that advantage over us.
So I know a lot of people in the very highest levels of the Chinese government. I can't believe that they would follow through with that. And we also make pharmaceuticals in India too, but I would suggest that this means we do have in the United States. And we've outsourced too much, frankly. Vaccine production, drugs, and such.
Well, and that's the next phase, if we will. It's good to hear you reassure us on that, and we appreciate it. And thanks as always for your insight. Come back soon.
Pleasure, Lou.
Thank you. And thank you for my souvenir. 3M, what is this? This is the 8210 Plus. That has something to do with my weight class, I believe. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Doctor. Welcome back. We'll soon be joined by Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. He is meeting with the President right now in the White House. They're discussing the coronavirus response bill. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, announcing that they had reached a deal. She and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. He, however, holding in reserve that declaration. We'll learn from him precisely what's going on here, I'm told, with this hour. So we're looking forward to his perspective on this and whether or not the President has indeed approved a deal with the Speaker. We are also taking up a number of other important issues, including the coronavirus, also an element of either pure coincidence or prescient prophecy by author Dean Koontz on the issue of the coronavirus. We wanted to bring this to your attention. In his 1981 novel, The Eyes of Darkness, his plotline centers around something called Wuhan 400. It is styled by Koontz as the perfect bioweapon with a 100% fatality rate that was developed in laboratories in his fictional novel outside the city of Wuhan. To show you, though, how the loopy left-wing national media has played this, Reuters went to the great trouble to call claims on social media that Koontz had predicted the current Wuhan virus outbreak as partly false, whatever in the world that means. It was all fiction, but the coincidence is fascinating and particularly interesting. We'll declare it partially true just to aggravate Reuters. We'll let you decide what you think, period. It was just an interesting, well, I think, novelty and coincidence. The United States destroyed 5 weapons facilities in response to the Iranian-backed attack at a military base in which 2 Americans were killed. U.S. Central Command says the locations south and west of Baghdad had Iranian-supplied weapons. that had been given to Hezbollah in Iraq, who carried out the attack Wednesday against Camp Tajah. The U.S. military is also moving in missile defense systems into Iraq again. Well, joining us now is General Jack Keane, former Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, retired four-star general, Fox Business senior strategic analyst. He is also the most recent recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the president bestowing that on him earlier this week. And we have always been proud of you, General, but prouder still. We salute you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Lou. Appreciate that very much.
Let's start with the tragedy of, again, 2 Americans killed in Iraq. It seems we cannot extricate ourselves.
What's happening here, Lou, is the Iranians really want to put pressure on the United States to get out of there. And that's what these deaths are about. They're escalating, and they're using this as leverage because there's a parliamentary vote coming up for a new prime minister. So they want 2 things. The Iranians want 2 things to happen. Get their stooge in there, number 1. And number 2, get the parliament to vote the United States out of Iraq. And that is what their strategy is here. The United States certainly is not going to stand for Americans being killed, in this case also a British soldier being killed. So thus we have a response in kind, limited to be sure, but nonetheless directed right at the heart of where that attack originated from.
And this attack and response cycle has gone on for almost 2 full decades. Where does it end, and at what point do we just get the hell out?
Well, we could do that today if we wanted to, Lou, but what's actually happening there is still a threat from ISIS. The president determined that we were going to defeat ISIS. We're going to get rid of the caliphate. We did get rid of the caliphate. There is still a threat there. We've got 5,200 soldiers. It's a very modest commitment assisting the Iraqis with that threat. And that's the reason we're there. Remember, we did get out of Iraq once before. ISIS came back, and we had to deal with this beginning in 2014. So we're down to a very small force to deal with that reality. And obviously, at some point, we will be out of Iraq. There's no doubt about that.
Well, there may be no doubt of it, but there's also no historical suggestion of an imperative that we will. I have absolute confidence in this president who wants to bring our troops home, and I applaud him in that. And I think the country shares his frustration. We have to come up with some. I guess, General, what I'm saying is what Albert Einstein famously said. The definition of insanity is repeating things that don't work ad infinitum. And we have no new doctrine, it seems, no new strategy in the region. It's very difficult to watch this, to see American lives lost for any reason there.
Well, I couldn't disagree with you more. I mean, what the president's strategy is pretty clear. He wants the locals to take care of the large amount of the fighting. So we've got 70,000 Syrians trying to keep ISIS down in eastern Syria, and we've got less than 1,000 assisting them. We've got 300,000 Iraqis doing the fighting against ISIS, and we've got 5,000 assisting. That's a different model. This isn't 130,000 troops going right at the throat of the enemy. And the same thing in Afghanistan. We're going to get down to a low number in Afghanistan, and we've got 300,000 Afghans doing the fighting, and we're doing assisting. That's a different model than what we had in the past, and I think it's pretty solid.
And and I'm not going to. You and I have argued this for years.
Yeah, about 10 years.
And we haven't declared a winner yet, have we? The truth is, to me, this is less doctrine or strategy than it is rationalization, and the result is another year of engagement and conflict, and at some point the hard decision has to be made. It seems to me that the most advanced superpower in all the world, with every technological advantage, should be able to assert itself through that technology and through that advanced weaponry rather than boots on the ground. But that's where I'll leave that and ask for your conclusions on Afghanistan as we wrap up.
Well, we've got peace negotiations going on. They're going to be very difficult, to say the least. The Afghanistan National Security Forces have gone through a lot of reform. We've got a government in place. It's not perfect, But we've got Taliban sitting on the other side of the table now. They've got one motivation: to get the United States out of there so they can take over. We'll see if we can make any progress with these guys. They are pretty entrenched. And it makes sense to try, Lou. I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but we also got to keep our eyes wide open as we're dealing with the Taliban on the other side of the table.
General, thanks so much for being here. Congratulations again on your much-deserved Medal of Freedom. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Lou.
General Jack Keane. We'd like to hear your thoughts on all of this. Share your comments and follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. And a programming note: Dr. Mark Siegel, Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch, Sidney Powell, defense attorney for General Mike Flynn. On Wall Street today, stocks skyrocketing. The Dow Jones Industrials climbing 1,985 points, and doing so as the president began his news conference this afternoon on the public-private partnerships that he has assembled to take on the coronavirus. The S&P up 230, the NASDAQ up 673. All three indexes, the largest one-day point increase ever. Volume on the big board above 8 billion shares once again. And by the way, another $2 trillion returned to the markets. The president celebrating his signature day today. The White House sent along to me a signed chart of the skyrocketing Dow, the S&P 500, and NASDAQ. The Dow, by the way, rose more than 1,000 points from the time he started talking to the time his news conference was over with his decisive announcement to declare the coronavirus pandemic a national emergency. Well received by markets all around the world, I'm sure. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Acting Director of National Intelligence, Richard Grenell has ordered a review of personnel and enacting a hiring freeze. Grenell was brought in by the president to help reorganize the agency. Grenell says this isn't a purge of any kind, but to make sure the agency is getting the most out of its intelligence community resources. Congressman Andy Biggs says Attorney General William Barr simply isn't telling the truth when he says that authorities can't track down terrorists if parts of FISA were allowed to expire on Sunday. Here's the congressman.
There is not that risk. They will continue to surveil. F in FISA stands for foreign, so they can continue to surveil foreign intelligence folks with or without FISA being reauthorized.
Congressman Andy Biggs, the head of the Freedom Caucus, and joining us tonight, John Solomon, award-winning investigative reporter, Fox Business contributor, and very importantly, the editor-in-chief of his new media outlet, JustTheNews.com. John, good to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Lou.
And you have been very busy this week, as is your practice. You're reporting, confirming that less than 2 weeks into the Trump presidency, they should have known that Flynn wasn't guilty because they'd already concluded that, and that he wasn't working as an agent of Russia, that the Steele dossier was a fraud and a manufactured bunch of nonsense, and that FBI targets like Carter Page and Papadopoulos made exculpatory statements, and yet here it rolled on.
It's amazing. Between January 7th and January 30th of 2017, President Trump only has served 10 days in office at that point. The entire underpinnings of the Russia collusion case were completely disproven. They knew that the Steele dossier had been disowned by its primary source. They knew that the primary targets they had been monitoring had made statements that undercut the main allegations they were investigating. And then on January 30th, the FBI writes a memo to the Justice Department stating flatly, Mike Flynn is not an agent of Russia. We have to conclude it. Mike Flynn is not an agent of Russia. That was what they were looking at that moment. All of it fell apart, and yet we ended up with another 2 years and 3 months of investigation. It's an outrage when people look at these documents.
And the interview record, the 302s, have disappeared. I mean, can't be found, or at least they won't be found
Yeah, that's a very suspicious thing. The FBI keeps very good records, except in the case of Mike Flynn's one interview. That should also trouble us all, just like the altered document that they did on Carter Page. The FBI did not act like the FBI here. They acted like a band of criminals in some of the activities they engaged in.
Well, when you look at the Inspector General's report and documents 17 outright lies by the FBI, you wonder if which is the real FBI.
Yeah, listen, there was a small group of people that hijacked this process, and they did it, I think we will find ultimately for political purposes, but it's not the FBI old. When you see, I'm going to have a story next week, what senior Justice Department officials were telling Bob Mueller later, and a few months later, after the case kind of fell apart, how concerned they were by the FBI's conduct. I'm going to break that story next week. You will not believe the comments that senior justice officials were saying about the FBI's conduct. Sadly, they didn't stop them, but they knew what was going on was wrong.
You know, I know that you're very much confident in Attorney General William Barr and John Durham, the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut, who he assigned to investigating the investigators of Spygate.
Yeah.
But here we are, more than a year later.
Yeah.
And there isn't a work product. There isn't a conclusion. And that has also been part of what is the new FBI. Truth goes there to die. And reports, and with a report, we wait patiently, and we're told they can't comment because they're carrying out an investigation and haven't filed a report. It looks like a subterfuge, straightforwardly, that allows them not to comment and not to ever deliver the truth.
Yeah, listen, I've done a lot of reporting in this area, and here are the three things I hear. There's been an exhaustive investigation. There are bombshell new revelations that will be coming out, particularly about how early the effort to spy on Trump and maybe other Republicans was. I think you're going to see it go back to December of 2015, perhaps. I think there are going to be new revelations. There's going to be new discipline. There's going to be new shaming of the people that oversaw this. I don't think there will be a lot of indictments. There may be some more firings. There may be one or two indictments, but we're going to get some accountability. I do think that John Durham is going to have a nice novel when he's done here. We're going to learn a lot more, and learning and exposing it hopefully will be one incentive to not do it again. But I think people will, if they're looking for a lot of prosecutions, I think they'll be disappointed.
Well, put me down as disappointed, because if you can do what these politically corrupt officials of the FBI and Justice Department did and get away with it, the American people have been fundamentally betrayed by also the investigators investigating the investigators.
A lot of people feel that way.
We're back with John Solomon, the editor-in-chief of JustTheNews.com, and we're talking about K.T. McFarland, Deputy National Security Advisor. She says a British intelligence official, she put it, hinted to her that the country had aided the Obama administration, that is the UK, had aided the Obama administration's early so-called collusion probe, the Russian collusion probe, during the election. Was Obama part of that conspiracy?
Well, it's funny. We're 3.5 years in, and we don't know the answer to that. We don't know what our foreign allies did to assist it. We've been told there's evidence of it, but we don't know what it is. But there's a 5-day window in January of 2017, that same month when the case is falling apart, where two things happened. K.T. McFarland, incoming Deputy National Security Advisor, her co-equal in Britain calls her and says, hey, we're not going to comment on the leak of the Steele dossier. It's the day the Steele dossier came out in BuzzFeed. But he made this incredible comment, which is, it's sometimes hard to tell where British intelligence ends and where American intelligence beginnings. He was clearly signaling that the two had worked together on the early Trump case. A few days later, Mike Flynn gets a formal letter from the National Security Advisor of Britain telling him, we don't trust Christopher Steele, you should know that. Those are now a matter of public record. The Brits were trying to tell the new president, we might have had our hands dirty on this whole case.
And how many hands were dirty, particularly in the intelligence community, assisting, that is, specifically U.S. intelligence? I mean, the Australian ambassador, Mitsud in Italy, Christopher Steele and MI6 in the U.K. This is a very large coincidence, isn't it?
Well, there'll be no coincidence to it. Somebody set these actions into motion, right?
Absolutely.
And the question is, who was it? And there may be a conglomerate. It may not be just one person. There might have been multiple operations going on, but there was a lot of foreign involvement targeting the Trump and maybe even larger, more Republicans than just Trump at the beginning of this whole episode.
And that's why we always can't wait for a Monday to watch John Solomon get to work. I appreciate it, John.
Thank you,
Great
Lou.
to have you with us every Friday
Thank you.
here. More breaking news tonight. U.S. trade officials have granted 27 companies tariff waivers for more than 100 medical supply items they're importing from China. Among the items that will be allowed to be purchased without tariff are protective gowns, exam gloves, patient bags, sanitizing wipes, face masks, and various other pieces of equipment necessary to the healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, technicians. The waivers coming only days, though, after Chinese state-run media had threatened to deny exports of life-saving drugs and antibiotics to the United States, saying America would plunge into, quote, the mighty sea of coronavirus. We are told by reliable sources that no one in the administration is taking that seriously because that just, well, and by the way, we're being told the same thing, that no one is taking it seriously in the medical community either. According to well-placed sources, as they say. Well, speaking of well-placed sources, joining us tonight to talk about the president's national emergency declaration and the difference it will make around the country is Congressman Matt Gaetz, a member of the House Judiciary, Armed Services Committees, and we are delighted to see you now out of self-quarantine and enjoying the Florida weather. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Lou. I'm 37 years old. You don't have to worry about me, but we might have to get you down here to Florida and get you out of New York. You're too important to the movement to stay up there if this thing starts ripping through Gotham.
Well, I was just trying to figure out, I couldn't agree with you more about being so important, but I think you're really talking about being aged and infirm, but nonetheless, I'll take it under consideration. It's great to have you with us. And the president today, and it's good to see you out of quarantine, even if self-imposed. It's really quite a remarkable time. And the president today driving the market higher with his national emergency declaration. It was one of those things you can graph, and which, by the way, the president sent me, I don't know if you saw it, a signed graph of the market taking off from the moment he began that news conference. If you're a Democrat in this country thinking about playing politics with the coronavirus, I would think that chart would probably dissuade you. What do you think?
There is no doubt that the president's words granted greater confidence and invigorated the markets today. What I could tell you also is that it's had a very practical and positive impact here on the ground. As a consequence of the president's national emergency declaration, states like Florida are able to pre-position ventilator assets. We're able to purchase more of the test kits and the detection swabs. And so being able to do this synchronizes state and national resources to be able to deal with this challenge. And there's no question that the markets and the American people trust the Trump administration to get this right, and we are getting it right around the country, and Florida's one great example.
Yeah, it's really stunning to take a look at the statistics, and this, we know that it's going to be with us for a while. It's going to be tougher than most of us had expected, but at the same time, to think that we are watching the mobilization of all these resources by the president, and I do want to update one thing. Speaker Pelosi talking about a negotiation with Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary. I want to update everybody watching us. The Treasury Secretary is still meeting with the president, and there is now acknowledgement that there is no deal because the president hasn't signed off on it. The president, by the way, with I think a very good idea, and that is to suspend the payroll taxes and to inject significant money into this economy. The Federal Reserve already doing its part in the repo market, the Treasury, another $1.5 trillion, the Treasury Secretary ordering that up. I mean, this government is responding robustly, I think.
We are, but unfortunately, Democrats continue to play politics with the legislation that could facilitate the most effective response by the government. It's pretty simple. Republicans are for testing. We are for the purchasing of medical infrastructure. But Republicans do not believe that in response to the coronavirus, we should realign, reorient, and massively expand every entitlement program in the United States. For example, we should not permanently change the SNAP program in response to the coronavirus. And I think if the American people saw the way these Democrats try to leverage any possible advantage against the president, they would be disgusted by these tactics and they would support our commander-in-chief as he works to mobilize our government at every level.
And, you know, I do think, too, we need to give credit to Governor Gavin Newsom in California, complimenting the president profusely and the response of the administration, helping, promising, and then delivering on those promises for the state of California. A number of Democratic governors doing so. Democrats, I think, are getting the idea that the American people will tolerate nothing less than following this leader who has had it right on every challenge that this country has faced to this point, and many of them still ahead of us, but doing a terrific job. You get the last word here, Congressman.
We are not informationless China. We are not borderless Europe. We have tools that we can use to beat this virus, and we're going to beat this virus. I think the American people, armed with information and with a government supporting our response, can be confident that we are going to prevail in this, and you see that confidence reflected in the market. So we have nothing but praise for the president. Now let's all get rid of the partisan politics, get rid of the poison pills, and work together on behalf of the American people. I don't think that's too much to ask. Please, Speaker Pelosi, get the poison pills out of the coronavirus legislation so we can work together.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, good. Are you really only 37? I will take
37.
That. Well, I'm not going to discuss the difference because I think it works out just about twice your age is what I'm thinking. I mean,
Lou,
is that
I
possible?
assumed you were in your late 50s. This
I
you
am.
look the same
I cannot
for the
lie.
decades I've watched you.
I am 57. I will never lie. Be sure to vote in tonight's poll. Thanks, Matt. We appreciate it. How long do you think the coronavirus outbreak will last in this country? 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, maybe more. Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs and stay with us. We're coming right back. We may be able to talk with the Treasury Secretary on the other side of this break. He is, I'm told we definitely will. He is still meeting with the president, so you will have the very latest, I assure you, from these negotiations. Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, with us next. We'll be right back. Please stay with us. Our next guest has been in constant negotiation throughout the day with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, talking on the phone with her at least 12 times today. We'll find out how many more as they discussed the legislation dealing with the coronavirus pandemic response. Joining us now by phone, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin. And Mr. Secretary, we appreciate you taking time to tell our audience about what is going on. So where do you and the Speaker stand? She says an agreement. You say...
Well, Lou, first of all, it's always great to be on your show. I'm sorry I'm not there on the camera, but we've been busy negotiating around the clock all day and dealing with all the market issues.
Well,
we have an agreement that reflects what the president talked about in his speech the other night. Mm-hmm. He's very focused on making sure that we can deal with the coronavirus, that people who have to be home quarantined, that hardworking Americans don't lose their compensation because they have to be home quarantined. And again, this is just for companies that are 500 and smaller. Obviously, we expect the bigger corporations to pick up these costs. And we also want to make sure that people can get free testing. If the president wants lots of testing, I think one of the things the market responded very positively to was the president has made just enormous progress with all these big companies coming in and saying that they're testing.
This public-private partnership that the president talks about and has throughout his administration, putting into action, you working with today, negotiating with the speaker on the response legislation, paid sick leave, 3 months of paid family medical leave. Is that part of this of the agreement?
It is, Lou, but again, let me just emphasize there's 14 days if you have to be home quarantined, which again, people who are sick, we want them to stay at home if you have to care for someone who's quarantined. And the, one of the issues is there's a lot of people, of schools who are closed. I think we'll have some small number of people who need to stay home and take care of. Yes.
I've got to interrupt you because we're coming up to the end of the broadcast, and I wanted to tell everyone very loudly how appreciative we are of everything you and the president have been doing today. You leading the intervention in the markets with the Fed and working for the president in the negotiation with the Democrats. Thanks and congratulations. Good night from New York.